Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. I'm Jamie Clark. This is the Saturday show. We are live and we are streaming on multiple platforms right now, including YouTube, including X, including LinkedIn. Wherever you get your social media, we're there. And we are going to be speaking to a special guest today called Dr. Zach Groeschel, who is joining us on a very early morning in Seattle, and we'll bring Zach into the conversation shortly. Before we do, though, I just want to quickly give a shout out to this show, which promotes and comes on every other Saturday, and that is on Teachers Talk Radio. You'll find us on your live stream, and you can tune in at 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. pretty much every other week. And you'll probably notice that a lot of the themes and topics that I like to cover on Teachers Talk Radio are quite similar in that they talk about teaching and learning. It's very much down to cognitive science and how we think, how we learn, which is what I love to dive into. So it's no different today with Zach, who's going to be talking about direct instruction and his approaches and his philosophy on teaching. So if you missed the previous shows, then please check them out on the playlist, which I've actually put together in recent weeks. You'll find that on my X account, also on Teachers Talk Radio as well. And you can find the previous shows, which I've just mentioned there, including desirable difficulties, the science of learning, homework, and effective learning strategies. And I think this threads it all really nicely together with what we're going to be talking about on today's show with Zach. So just before we dive in and we get talking to Zach, I just want to quickly mention our sponsor today. As always, it's Teachers Talk Radio sponsor is John Catt Educational. In fact, I've been doing a bit of light reading today. I say light reading, but this is quite a thick book. It's a John Catt book. It is the Direct Instruction Practitioner's Handbook by Kurt Engelman. So I've been diving into that, trying to do a bit of research before speaking to Zach, the guru himself, on direct instruction today. And I've learned quite a bit. So if you are interested in getting this book or any other book from John Catt, then please know that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational. If you don't know who they are, they're the publishers of professional development books and resources. They support great teaching and learning around the world. You've probably heard of the books. If you don't know the John Catt, then get onto their website and check out their library. It's johncattbookshop.com, and you can explore a full range of titles. And guess what? You can actually get a wonderful discount on your order if you enter the code JCTTR2425. You get 20% off, everybody. That's an amazing deal. So it's on your screen now if you can't remember it. 20% off your order at johncattbookshop.com. Right. Okay. I think what we're ready to do now is bring our wonderful guest into the studio. So I'm delighted to welcome him today, Dr. Zach Groeschel. He's an experienced teacher. He's an instructional coach. He's an educational consultant. He does a lot of work on Twitter and interacting with folks about his views on direct instruction. He's definitely popular on there. He's based in Seattle in the USA, where it's quite early. I'm sure you'll be able to see that Zach is drinking coffee right now and trying to wake himself up. But he works nationwide in the US and also internationally as well to develop and apply high quality instruction based on research on cognitive science. So in this episode, we're definitely going to delve into that, and also how students learn, but also how they learn through direct instruction, DI, and discuss how teachers can also elevate their practice through instructional coaching, which I know that Zach is a massive, massive fan of and advocate of. So I'm going to bring Zach into the studio. Zach, welcome.
How are you doing, Jamie? It's so good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And as we said just before we started the show, it's a fairly early start for you, right, over there?
Well, if you're a parent, like I am, of two young girls who do not like to sleep in past this time, it's actually not too bad. But yes, it is, 5 a.m. here in Seattle, but super happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've just been saying that I've got two kids I've just put in bed. Zach's two kids are just getting up quite early, I'd imagine, soon. Okay, so Zach, do you want to start off by telling us a bit about yourself for those people who don't know you, and what kind of is your background in education?
Yeah, well, I mean, I went to college to become a teacher, and I fell in love with teaching. I think originally I thought this would be a good way to go overseas and maybe teach some English, maybe get out there and explore the world. And I actually, for 7 years, I did that. I was overseas in Sudan and China and Vietnam, teaching in international schools, so private schools of students. But I've for now, the majority of my career, I've been in the United States and teaching in public schools. Uh, through teaching, I wanted to explore more of my passion for cognitive science and for instructional design. So I did go and get a PhD in instructional design. And I also started to find that I needed something else. I needed to work with teachers. I wanted to improve schools on a school-wide level, even a district level. And so I got into instructional coaching. And as you said in the wonderful introduction, I spent a lot of my evenings kind of debating and exploring different ideas around teaching on social media, and that's led to a lot of opportunities for me. I go work with schools. I just got back from a tour of three different states, different schools that wanted to talk DI explicit teaching, and so they brought me in and it kind of helped them get launched for this new school year.
Very cool. So do you work with groups of teachers on a one-to-one level as well, and kind of help refine their practice in the classroom, or is it kind of generally keynote speeches and whatnot that you do?
I do a little bit of everything. I mean, I'll have a keynote speech in Chile coming up for Research Ed. That's going to have a ton of people, 800 or so teachers. I was brought in for a district in Watertown, New York, where their entire district was there in a big, large kind of theater auditorium, but also working one-on-one. There's new math coaches. I do a lot on the science of math, new math coaches in a district that I'm working at an individual sort of personalized basis. I'll do a little bit of everything because I'm seeing, and this is new for the US, I'm seeing a lot of movement in the direction of schools wanting to teach a little bit more explicitly, wanting to have a little bit more structured teaching. And so what I do is of interest to a certain type of school.
Cool. Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I've also noticed that shift as well, moving from more discovery-based learning approaches to more explicit and structured approaches. Just before we get into that, though, exciting news. You've got a book coming out. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes. Well, it is called Just Tell Them. And it's all about modeling and explanation. And, despite, I guess, the cheeky title of Just Tell Them, it's about more than just telling them. It's about the fact that modeling or explaining sits within an explicit teaching system, and how to use it, when to use it, and what the research supports in terms of effective modeling, effective storytelling, even using gestures, emotional resonance, expressiveness, eye contact. It really gets into, I think, how to present and convey information in a way that is clear as crystal, is the whole point of the book.
That's going to be a really big hit, Zach. I think that's just what teachers are crying out for. It's very very granular, very kind of practical by the sounds of it, and that's exactly what teachers want. And from listening to your podcasts, with I think I listened to one the other day with Tom Sherrington and Oliver Caviglioli about instructional coaching, and just making these strategies and these ideas as crystal clear as possible for teachers and as accessible for teachers as possible is really important in moving professionals forward, I believe.
Well, and yeah,
So,
that your work with the
mm,
one pagers has inspired me in that regard, right? Maybe it's in the infographic or the information design format, but we can learn from that, and we could apply that to our speech. We can, and we shouldn't just be speaking either. We should be pairing it with images and thinking about
yeah,
dual coding principles. All that's in the book.
and that could be a whole nother 3 shows, I reckon. Okay, so let's dig into what we're here for, which is direct instruction, or DI. I guess the first thing I want to ask you is can you clarify any misconceptions about DI, because it can be quite a confusing topic in the fact that people don't often know what it is and what it refers to. So do you want to clarify that? What exactly is direct instruction and how does it work?
Yes, I mean, there's really two parts to direct instruction that I think it's important to know about both of them and how they can be used and combined. The audience here is going to range all the way from maybe kindergarten all the way up into maybe even university teaching, right? We teach
Mm,
a wide range of subjects and students, and so both of these kind of dueling definitions are important. On one hand, we have sort of a lowercase di, direct instruction, which is for me synonymous with explicit teaching.
mm,
It's the teacher who is teaching primarily themselves, leading the learning. And
mm,
it's also synonymous with the gradual release of responsibility, right? The teacher will model the material up front, giving lots of opportunities for the students to receive worked examples, to see an expert's thinking, like a think aloud, beginning with an explanation. And importantly, at the beginning of this series, the explanations are usually pretty brief. Teachers
mm,
using minimal statements, and they're keeping cognitive load in mind while they convey just very much just the words that need to be said at the start of the model, and then that gradually fades, and the teacher is now having the students take more and more responsibility over responding on the content. Uh,
mm,
so we sometimes call that I do, we do, you do,
mm,
which is just an Anita Archer, who's a kind of explicit instruction guru, an Anita
mm,
Archer way of saying, I'm going to explain it at first, and then now that you know a little bit about it, I'm going to ask you questions about it, and finally at the end, I'm going to have you do something with it. And that's where towards the end of the you do phase, the students may be working on something in partners, or maybe it's a little bit more hands-on, or
mm.
what some people would call inquiry based. That's where the student is actually fully controlling the learning, and the teacher is moving and circulating and acting more as a guide on the side.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
this system is familiar with a lot of people because it's just a generic term, lowercase di, for great
Mm.
explicit teaching based around the limitations of working memory, around
So
how kids tick. Yeah.
can I just jump in there, Zach? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So when you're saying the lowercase d and lowercase I and explicit teaching, is that also linked to Rosenshine and Rosenshine's principles of instruction, would you say?
Absolutely, right? Rosenshine published kind of the most popular summary with 10 principles, which
Mm,
involve daily review, guided practice, modeling, scaffolds, right? The lowercase di is Rosenshine. Rosenshine's summary is a great place to start. It's a free
mm.
PDF online, right? Anyone can pick it up.
Yeah, cool. So in terms of, the lowercase di and the explicit teaching, what's the difference between the uppercase di and, and the direct instruction process?
Right. Well, the uppercase di started even a little tiny bit earlier. It's kind of interesting. There's a little bit of debate over that, but a little bit earlier than the lowercase di word started coming out, that direct instruction was was conceived of by Zig Engelman and
Mm,
colleagues back in the 60s and 70s. They were working with preschool students, and they wanted to design a set of what at first was principles and then became commercial programs,
mm,
a system, a full system of how to teach explicitly that didn't just involve a list like
mm,
Rosen and Shines is essentially a
mm.
list of things you can do, but actually included the what, included
Yeah.
the models, included the
Scripts.
programs and the scripts,
Mm,
everything from the very beginning, including pre-tests. How do I place students into the correct level? How do I
mm,
make sure that students can proceed above that level if they're going to faster than the teacher, or if they're going
yeah.
slower? How do I remediate? So the Zig Engelman capital DI instruction is what the book is that you hold in your hands, right? It's a John
Mm,
Catt book. A and that those sort of commercial programs came into my life as a math interventionist. I was
mm.
teaching students math using the not only the philosophy of Zig Engelman, but also the programs.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, earlier today, I don't know if you saw it. I put a poll on X about the common misconceptions around, explicit teaching, direct instruction. So I'm just going to shove the results of that poll. Well, it's not quite finalized yet, but these are the current standings of the poll on the screen. Because the question was like, what is the biggest myth or misconception you've encountered about direct instruction? So the majority of people actually said out of the options, if you're listening to this as a recording, were that it's too rigid, it stifles creativity, it's boring, or other. But we didn't get many other comments, to be honest. But the outright winner was it stifles creativity. So, in terms of direct instruction, I guess explicit teaching practices, what's your response to that in terms of, people think that it stifles creativity? Does it?
Well, I guess I want to know whose creativity are they referring to, right? I've heard
Mm,
both that the creativity that's being stifled is the teacher's creativity, and
mm,
also it's the student's ability to be creative. In terms of the teacher, I don't think that that's true. Regardless of whether you are designing your own program, or if you are using scripts,
mm,
I find that teaching with direct instruction is invigorating. It's exciting to see students be successful.
mm,
As a teacher, the what you're being creative with is the way that you convey the information and the way that
mm,
you are eliciting responses, but you're not being creative in terms of today I woke up, I looked on Pinterest, I found an activity, I want all of you guys to try it out. Hey, it didn't work, and I was creative, right? So there are limitations, I think, to the extent that you can show up to work and make something up and see how it goes, because
yeah,
your student performance is really what you're setting your sights on. You want to see students improving on their skills. You're not there to fill time or just to
mm,
expose them to things. You're not there
mm,
to see, oh, if they explore it, maybe they get something out of it that I can't measure, right? When you're talking
yeah,
about direct instruction, you really are looking at improving their long-term memory resources, their schema. So you do have a mission, and you have to be creative within that mission. In terms of the student side, does direct instruction limit students' creativity? Well, I started off by saying you're going to gradually fade into that you do, right?
yeah, yeah,
During the students doing, when the students actually are doing their own work, it could be a worksheet, or it could just be a short answer assignment. But
mm,
a lot of times you want the students to take what they've learned in class and apply it. You want
yeah,
to see them generalize it, or you want to see them justify their answers. You want to see
yeah,
them do those sort of critical thinking behaviors that we want out of students. I think if you think of creativity as combining all of your knowledge to make and generate something new,
Mm.
DI and explicit teaching arms the students with all of those resources so that they can be much more creative than if you left them in their
Mhm.
ignorance. If you left them as how they were before and said, hey, be creative with what you already know. It's be creative with what you already know plus all the stuff we talked about in class, right? So I
Yeah.
think it actually creates more creativity than people give it credit.
Yeah, there's obviously the research that suggests that more knowledge and having a strong foundation of knowledge and networks of schema and whatnot kind of gives more kind of a basis to students to then be creative because they have a solid ground to work from. So I think that's generally my point of view as well. But we can never just kind of give students, I don't think anyway, just open rein and just discover from without any input from the teacher. So I guess that's another debate which we'll come to shortly in terms of the idea of progressive teaching versus more traditional teaching. If we just quickly mention those, I can ask you about your own practice and how these kind of ideas on direct instruction have transformed your own personal teaching, and in what ways has it done that?
Well, yeah, it's transformed everything. I mean, I started when I was teaching, trying to do what my professors, the lecturers at my university told me I should be doing, which was
Mm,
allow kids to figure stuff out. At first, it
yeah.
didn't really make any sense. I thought about my own self, like, I was a student who did really well, but I wasn't necessarily intrinsically motivated to do very much. I needed teachers to guide me and to support me, and I knew, and I, if I needed to cheat my way through something, I would, if just to get through it, like everybody else, right? So there was, at a certain level, like in terms of human nature, it didn't really make any sense to me. But I tried those ideas to get the
Mm,
kids to inquire and to discover material, and I kept on hitting roadblocks. I kept on
mm,
finding every time I didn't explain the material to them, their uh their engagement with the material was superficial, it was unsophisticated. The kids would start to exhibit behaviors that I thought, okay, this is a classroom management problem, but I ended up
yeah.
finding it wasn't a classroom management problem. It actually was an instructional problem. The kids
Mm,
did not have the supports and the clarity from the teaching that would allow them to engage in the material in the way that we would expect of them, or in the
mm,
proper way. So I mean, I think over time I started to tweak and experiment. I didn't have the research yet. I
mm,
didn't know about cognitive load theory or working memory. I didn't know about Rosenshine's principles, but it was over time kind of seeing the success of my own students in figuring out this is much better. This is much more fulfilling when I get my kids
mm,
to master the material faster, more efficiently. They feel so
mm.
good about themselves, right? And that's what it's all about.
Okay, so do you do the full fat DI in terms of scripting and the things that are mentioned in the book? Do you do kind of the full fat version, or is it pretty much just every now and again elicit evidence of learning, and what's your version?
Yeah, well, yes, when I teaching math as an interventionist in my school, meaning that the students who are 5, 6, 7 years behind their peers in math,
Yeah,
I was looking around. I was like, I need to find a way forward with these students because I can't reach them. Their behavior was really challenging. Their teachers didn't want them in school, in their classrooms, right? Get them out of here,
yeah,
right? They're really troubling students, and that's where I found that using the full DI system, including the scripts and the programming, that's where I found success with that. And so I would teach kids with math, and what you do is you place them into their correct levels so that when they come
yeah,
to me in my classroom, they're all on the same page. They're all working on the same topic because the placement test says this is something they do not know. And
yeah,
then I preview the script. I look at the script and I go, just like if you use the PowerPoint that someone else designed, you wouldn't just start playing it, right? You need to
No, that's
preview it,
right.
or right. So I preview the script, I kind of say it out loud. I'm at the board and I practice
Mm,
it. And when they come in, we get straight to work. The kids are in rows, and I'm doing my thing. It's like being an actor on the stage, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
lots and lots of what people always remark about when they think about DI lessons is how interactive it is.
Mm.
Every other sentence, like just every other few words, the students are asked to respond, often in
Yeah.
unison, right?
But
And
that's also explicit teaching as well, isn't it? The lowercase di, the whole kind of principles around it is supposed to be interactive, and I think that goes back to the the poll that I put on earlier. Like it's too rigid or it's boring was one of the suggestions, one of the options. Which from my point of view, it's not. It's kind of the opposite, like you said. It's very interactive, and you are asking and checking for understanding every few minutes almost, aren't you?
right. And I mean, it's just back and forth, right? It's like a tennis
Mm,
match, right?
mm.
Teacher sort of serves, student hits the ball back and forth. And if you have a video feed, you'll see my hands are kind of going wild, right? But a lot of it is I give you my signal, you say the answer, great.
Yeah.
We're moving on. Now it's back to here. We're sort of marching along in a really in a nice brisk pace at all times. When people say like it's not engaging, I want to know how they define engagement, because I will get far more responses from every
Mm,
student in the class than
mm,
I've seen of any inquiry system, where most of the students are not saying anything, or they're lying low in the back. The same students are dominating the conversation. The teacher has to fill a lot of the space because the students don't know what they're doing. That's been my experience, is that
mm.
teaching directly and explicitly brings way more kids into the fold, and they answer at a far higher rate than any other approach.
Can I just play devil's advocate for a second? What would you say to the people who say that direct instruction only works for certain subjects like maths? Because you're a maths teacher, right? So most people would say, well, obviously you'd be an advocate of direct instruction because it lends itself beautifully to teaching maths, as it's a process-based kind of subject in that sense. What would you say about that?
I love that people call me a math teacher, because I hated math.
All right,
I
okay,
hated
me
math
too.
in school, and I hated it because I had several teachers who, like, for example, in seventh and eighth grade, that's right in the middle years,
Yeah,
that I had a teacher who said, this year, if you want to learn math, you can learn it. If you don't want to learn it, you can do whatever you want. I'm not going to stop you. So what did I do? I got out my Magic the Gathering cards, and for 2 years I played Magic the Gathering with my friends in the back, right? I completely avoided math and hated it. But
yeah,
truthfully, I'm an elementary or a primary teacher. So
mm,
I had to teach math, but I also had to teach every other,
right,
core subject. Um no, it doesn't just lend itself to math. Math is beautiful in that the answer that the student is going to give is either correct or incorrect, right?
yeah,
And there's no reason to have a philosophical debate around around that, but people like to. Does 2 plus 3 equal 5, or does it equal 6, or is it in the heart of everyone, right? Math's nice because there's always a correct answer. So when I give a choral response or a mini whiteboard, uh, I can be certain that if they have it correct, that they're on the right track. Where
yeah,
when we're talking about English, or we're talking about history,
mm,
the answers are often more open ended. Maybe it's they're debatable questions, right? They're not simply yes or no answers.
mm,
And so, but they lend themselves in the same way. If I teach you something and I give you one perspective and you say, I like that perspective, but let me add one more thing to it because there's actually some gray area. Now
yeah,
we're having a real robust academic discussion. And then but the teacher is still there providing models, giving scaffolds,
yeah.
getting responses, even if they end up being more open-ended or debatable, right?
Mm. Yeah, I know about that because I'm an English teacher, so I know exactly what you're talking about there, Zach. Chalk and cheese, I think we are. All right, let's move on to explicit teaching versus discovery. We'll just touch on this because it feels as though in America and well, I think in America, but definitely in Australia, there's such a strong attachment to like inquiry learning and discovery learning. Now, I've had some positive experiences with that. I mean, I must say it's not something I'm totally against by any means. But why do you think there's such a strong attachment to it, and people are quite reluctant to embrace more explicit teaching strategies?
Um, yeah, I mean, this is an odd one because if you ask teachers, do you teach explicitly or do you use direct instruction, lowercase di? Uh, a lot of people will say, yeah, of course, it has a time and a place, right?
Mm,
But I think what they're referring to is explicit teaching as being a
yeah,
single event that happens in their class where they explain stuff on occasion, right?
yeah,
They're not really using a model that is based in research or based on all this interesting stuff that we debate online, right? They're
mm,
just sort of they're sort of teaching what I would maybe call random teaching. They're just sort of, today I'm going to try this, see if it works,
yeah,
and so when they say I teach with direct instruction from time to time, it's not part of a sort of a systematic approach in which they can predict what will happen or they can explain why students don't understand it. It's a bit random, right? But
yeah,
there is an emphasis in at least in American education on discovery or minimally guided approaches in which the teacher is encouraged by their line manager to allow the kids to do a lot more open-ended exploring,
mm,
and it's the results are always predictable.
mm,
Right now, the in math, the big thing in the United States, at least, is this idea of productive struggle, which is the
yeah,
same thing as discovery learning.
yeah,
The idea that I will pose this problem that you do not know on purpose, for the point of it is to see you fail, and then
yeah,
when you fail, I will take different samples from around the room and I will put them on the board and I will say, look at all of these different interesting ideas that we have.
yeah,
Which of them do you like? Which of them are the best? Great, great, great. Okay, tomorrow we're going to keep on going with this. And the
yeah,
modeling is non existent, or if it is, it's out of frustration from the teacher or
mm,
last resort. It's always predictable, Jamie, because I go into classrooms and I observe teachers doing what they're told to do in this
yeah,
productive struggle model, and the kids are not paying attention.
mm,
The kids are annoyed at the whole
yeah.
process, and they're not learning anything. They're
Do
not
you
learning
find do you
anything at
find that
all.
affects do you find that affects behavior as well? Like, it has an impact on poor behavior?
Absolutely. And the advocates of the sort of minimally guided approaches will sometimes say, well, then you're not managing the classroom well enough. They'll blame
Mm,
they'll blame the teacher on what is
mm,
essentially an instructional problem. It's
yeah,
that the students don't know enough to be able to engage with the content. They don't feel successful because it's not broken down into smaller steps. They're not
yeah,
asked small step questions based on small step presentations. It's just
yeah,
giving large problems and saying, who's the smartest in the room? Who already knows the material? And if you don't know it, I'm going to come around and then I might explain it to you, given if I feel like it, or if a hint isn't good enough, right? um I try not
yeah,
to give a caricature of this approach, but this is what I see in real classrooms, and this is what I personally did for several years, was try to keep my explaining, my modeling to a minimum to allow
mm,
students to figure it out.
mm. And do you think is can it be combined? Can you successfully combine direct instruction with something like inquiry-based learning or discovery learning? And I know that, for example, Tom Sherrington talks about the mode A and mode B, in the learning rainforest, and I think in teaching walkthroughs as well. What do you think about mode A and mode B being like instructional practices, and mode B being more kind of, discovery based practices? Could there be like a blend between them? Is there a balance? What is your view on that?
Yeah, so I take the line of thinking, and people don't always agree with this, but my line of thinking is that direct instruction, explicit instruction, is a gradual release model.
Yeah.
And at the end of the sequence, the students have been prepared to apply and to use their knowledge in a simulation, in a scenario, maybe in a project, right?
Yeah.
I don't call that at the end inquiry based learning or discovery learning, because I think it's essentially, what are they discovering? They're just doing what we've been doing in class. They are using what I'm saying. This is not discovery. The same with inquiry. I did my PhD dissertation. That is an inquiry project. It
Yeah.
involves you all by yourself trying to identify a gap in the world's knowledge,
Yeah.
researching that gap, and then generating an original product for an audience that allows you to share what you learned from your
Mm.
inquiry.
Yeah.
Doing a small simulation or a project at the end of explicit instruction, for me, has nothing to do with a legitimate inquiry project. So when people say I blend them, I say that's a nice way to sort of bring us all together. We can all hold hands and say we all did it. But for me, it is a sequence. It is a sequence that is systematic, that doesn't begin ever with
Yeah.
a lot of open-ended exploring. So that's my distinction there.
So would you still do those things in your practice? Would you still incorporate some of those elements that you just mentioned, but obviously not label it as inquiry, but was it something you still do?
Absolutely. And
Mm.
a lot of the mode B, I love the distinction, the mode A, mode B from
Yeah, me
Tom
too.
Sherrington. A lot of that stuff is not actually an inquiry project. It's like
Mm.
it's a field trip or a museum visit, right?
Mm.
A lot
Mm.
of it is like, we're going to do what I love about, because I just visited some schools in the UK.
Yeah.
I love the assemblies where students will do songs and things. Those songs sometimes sit within the learning, and sometimes they're
Yeah.
just to celebrate our successes, right? And be in community, right? So
Mm.
part of your day has got to be part of a whole school program, has got to be some of these things that they're more about community, they're about bonding, they're about culture,
Mm.
right? But let's take the museum visit, right? Do I
Mm.
want my kids to go to a museum like, if you've ever been to the Louvre or whatever in
Yeah.
Paris, and you go in there and you go, yeah, 99% of this I don't understand at all. It looks all the same to me. Or do you want them to go to the museum visit having knowledge that they've been armed with, that they can
Yeah.
look and they see, oh yeah, that's what we talked about.
Mm.
That's a specific thing we're learning about. So it still happens at the end, almost always, this mode B stuff. It always ends with instruction first and then application at the end.
No, that's a lovely example. I really like the museum example you gave there. So we know that DI has a lot of strategies, and that's one thing I want to talk to you about is the actual strategies that you use in your classroom. Because on this show before, I've mentioned to other people like what are your top strategies for explicit teaching and whatnot. But I really want to talk to you about your modeling approach, in particular your group responses, your whole group response approaches, and also your whole class reading strategies as well. So can we just start with that then, Zach? Because it'd be interesting to know on a classroom level what your modeling strategies would be to be, in that DI approach. What do you do that is different or more powerful than any normal kind of process of modeling?
Right. The In general, and this may pertain more to math because it's not a storytelling approach, but in
Yeah.
general, I think the main difference in the modeling is that you were only saying a very limited set of words that are
Mm.
brief, that are pre-selected, that are often rehearsed and practiced,
Mm.
or they're scripted, right? The model itself is presenting what in DI, in the Engelman DI world, they call a general case. When I give you
Yeah.
this model or this example, it applies to the most things that it could possibly apply to. And I'm not
Yeah.
going to talk about you see sometimes teachers go, well, yeah, but there's also this case and that case, right? What you do with the students is make sure when they're presenting something, they are a naive learner. Their working
Mm.
memory is very limited. It's easy to overload them. So an extended lecture of lots of transient information is going to overload them. But a very minimal statement with only one possible meaning that could be conveyed, a single example, then tied maybe with a non-example, A
Mm.
very short and brief model is going to be a lot more effective. And so when I'm presenting, I will do that very small model, and then I will immediately elicit a response. Uh,
Mm.
when it comes to eliciting responses, you can choose to only get one student's response, or you can take advantage of whole class response systems and get everyone to respond at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we want to do that, but without practice, without maybe some instructional coaching, it's a lot of teachers will default to just whoever has their hand up, right?
Yeah.
Um, my favorite approach is sort of to combine a series of five different whole class responses.
Mm.
The first one is turn and talk, which or think, pair, share, which needs to be snappy. The question needs to be long enough to talk about in a few sentences, but
Yeah.
not so short that it's only a one word answer. So it's kind of tricky. You kind of have to plan your questions in advance. You got to have A partners, you got to have B partners, and you have to practice this routine from the onset of the school year.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of, what's funny, Jamie, what's funny is a lot of people in the DI explicit teaching world don't really like turn and talk. I think the more uber traditionalists don't like it.
I
Maybe
think it
it's
seems to be more of an explicit instruction strategy because I've read Anita Archer's book, and I think, and is it? I can't remember his first name. Is it Ted Hughes? I can't remember his first name. But they talk about pair share, don't they? Quite a lot in that book, for example. But when I skipped through this, I didn't see it as much. The kind of paired activities. Carry on. What were you going to say about that?
I just think it's essential. I understand it's very, very hard. I have a list of things that can go wrong, like some list of 16 things that can go wrong in turn and talks, because there's almost more that can go wrong that can go right.
Yeah.
But nailing it, like right now, you and I are talking, and if you were sitting with your partner listening to this, at 8 a.m. And I said, so go ahead and turn and talk about what Jamie and Zach just talked about. You're going to get a real chance to rehearse, to sit in your thoughts. And then I can
Yeah.
ask you to share it out. And now we're having a class discussion about what I just said. It's
Yeah.
a perfect way of getting the class to make sure that they're rehearsing the material, and then you're of course listening in. There's a formative element too. I'm listening
Yeah.
in, I'm checking, is what they're talking about even remotely on topic, or
Yeah.
right, or are they confused, right? Is the
Yeah.
class silent, right? um the other one, I won't go through all five of these, but the other one that I often emphasize is choral response.
Yeah,
And
I was going to ask you about that, and
yeah.
the reason was because I DM'd Zach a few weeks ago about choral response because it's part of a special project that I'm currently working on, which I'll reveal more about soon. Basically, it's a new book I'm actually writing, and that's all I'll say for now. But I did tap into Zach's experience on choral responses, and I really want to hear what he has to say about it.
And congrats, on all these things you're doing. I can't. I'm sure your evenings are filled with.
I've got a 2-year-old as well and a 5-year-old. I don't know how I do it, to be honest. Yeah.
I know, and that's why I tell people when I show that book with the book. I'm like, yeah, I robbed my children of their father for the year that I
Yeah.
wrote this. I mean, so choral response is a great way to get. I think a lot of people think it doesn't do the job of turn and talk because it's one word or a single chain of words, right? If I say,
Mm,
what is this? And I point to the top of a fraction and everybody says numerator. And then I say denominator, right? We're getting kids to say one word at a time or a very small string of words. They think that that means that the students are not getting a chance to really have deeper understanding. Honestly,
mm,
that's not the point of choral response. The point for me is more a checking for listening function,
mm,
where
mm,
when I say something and I ask you to respond immediately, the answer, and no one says it, I have a feeling no one was paying attention. Now I have to repeat myself, right? And in getting a class to kind of answer on cue all at the same time, you get everybody tuning in, leaning forward a little bit more. And
Yeah.
I'm checking for listening, but it does have a formative assessment function as well, where first of all, the student needs to think about the answer in order to get it correct, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can tell immediately that kid's coattailing, right? That kid's just following along. They're not really answering. But you're thinking about the answer, and once you've thought of an answer, you say your answer, and I look around, I hear all the responses, and I go, great, I can move on or
Yeah.
not. So
Yeah.
much teaching involves the teacher saying something and not even checking remotely if they're listening or if they're getting it.
Mm.
And that's our job, really, is to not move on too quickly. For the most part, I think most teaching is just exposing kids to material, moving
Mm.
on. Core response breaks that up. It ensures that you're getting everybody to respond before, and then you only move forward when you know we're all there, we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I think a lot of these strategies come down to really, honing your craft and really working on, strategies at that classroom level, at a really granular step-by-step approach. So we're going to come on to that in a few minutes because we're going to talk about instructional coaching, and Zach's going to talk about his point of view on, instructional coaching, what he does, what his perspectives are, which I'm really excited to talk to him about in a minute. I just want to remind you, this is a live show, everybody, if you're watching live. So please type any questions you've got to us via the chat on whichever platform you're on. And we're just going to take a 2-minute break just to hear from our sponsors today, which are...
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Get back into the action. We're going to talk about instructional coaching. I just want to again remind you, please type any questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd really love Zach to engage with some people live on the show. Let's bring Zach back in. Hello. So I wanted to move on, Zach, quickly to instructional coaching, because I know this is a big thing for you, especially recently in terms of your experiences in schools and your opportunities you've had. But I just wanted to quickly ask, what is your model for instructional coaching? Because which one do you find most effective? There are different strategies and different approaches, aren't there? And just before we went live, I was talking to Zach about this because I know of two main instructional coaching processes. One of them is Jim Knight's partnership approach, which is all about, I guess, collaborating with the teacher, setting peers goals, respecting their autonomy. And then on the other side of the coin, we've got Paul Bambrick Santoyo's approach, which is more directive, and it involves more, frequent observations, precise feedback, action steps to help the teacher improve. And I guess it ties on from what we were just saying, Zach, about, classroom strategies. What are your chosen approaches and what works for you?
Yeah, I mean, what you're alluding to. It's like there's the instructional wars we talked about before the break of explicit teaching and discovery learning, kind of, that are, in competition. I think in coaching there are also two different approaches. Like you said, there's the more directive approach and there's the more facilitative approach. I think one framework that kind of marries these, and I love the Paul Bambrick Santoyo framework, but sort of some newer literature that is also a John Catt book, is the responsive coaching approach by Josh Goodrich.
Yes.
And I think
Yep.
that perfectly blends the two in a way that makes sense with how all learners learn, right?
Yeah.
And it's essentially this, that when I'm saying directive, I mean that the coach themselves is going to give additional information that the teacher themselves doesn't come up with, right? I'm
Mm,
going to model, I'm going to give you a video, I'm going to say, hey, this is something I think would work in this
mm,
situation, and I'll show you how I do it. The facilitative approach is asking lots of questions and say, what would you do in this situation, or what were you thinking when this happened? Both of these, both asking questions and modeling to teachers is important. When do you use them? And that's where I
mm,
kind of find some more popular instructional coaching approaches lack, is that they do
yeah,
not specify when there is. And in fact, I think they even downplay the idea of the coach being an expert in instruction and
yeah,
fully
yeah,
giving the
yeah,
teacher autonomy. If the teacher knew what they were going to do, you'd think maybe they would do it once in a while, right? In this situation, they don't know what they need to do. What are we going to do? We're going to model it. And so that's the Josh
mm,
Goodrich kind of responsive coaching approach. If the
yeah,
schema of the teacher is full and robust, and through our discussion, I'm seeing, and through lots of observation and drop ins, I'm seeing that the teacher knows what to do. They just didn't do it that one time or whatever.
mm,
I'm going to ask lots of probing questions. I'm going to get them to sort of through dialogue figure out what it is that they may need to do next time when I come in, or in future lessons. If they don't know it, their schema is partial, or their schema is
yeah,
very, is weaker. I'm going to give them a model. And I think
yeah,
it's that modeling piece that is missing in instructional coaching, at least in the United States, where
yeah,
I think coaches are very passive sometimes. I think
mm,
a lot of times they don't really know what to say. Maybe they themselves jumped into instructional coaching a little too early in their careers, and they
mm,
themselves don't know what they would have done in the situation. And so, honestly, if I had to choose between what would most coaches need to work on, or what would most teachers benefit from the current emphasis in coaching, I would
mm,
say thinking about being a little bit more directive and thinking
yeah,
about what am I going to bring to this conversation that's going to help this teacher move forward beyond asking questions about.
yeah,
And a lot of
yeah,
times these questions, Jamie, I just, let's be frank, a lot of these questions that I see in observing other coaches are not even instructional coaching questions.
mm,
They're
mm,
around, how was your day? Yeah, it's hard. What
yeah,
was the behavior? Oh yeah, the kids are little rotten little guys, right? I know, I understand. And a lot of it is really closer sometimes to therapy or to counseling.
mm,
And this to me, I think, has no business in instructional coaching. It really needs to
yeah.
be focused on instruction.
Yeah, I actually tried the directive approach last year. I worked with some early careers teachers, and I chose that particular approach because they didn't have the knowledge of what they were doing in class. You know, in order to work out what they did need to do to improve. So, regardless of the questions I asked them, I could see it as an expert, but for them, they couldn't see it. So for me, I would definitely went with a more directive approach and giving clear guidance and clear steps because it just made sense in that respect. But what do you think are some common failures of schools, or when they implement instructional coaching? What do they do wrong, and how can we address them? Do you think?
Well, I know, and I've talked and I've written about this too, about the UK approach to coaching is a bit different than the American approach in general. Here in the United States, we have often a full-time instructional coach, someone
Yeah.
who was a teacher, moved out of the classroom. They have an office now. they are they're essentially a member of the leadership staff without a
Right.
teaching load.
Right.
But so I think of instructional coaching really as a verb mostly, right? It's what
Mm.
the people in the building do that help move teaching forward. It's not evaluation, right?
Yeah.
It's specifically talking about how to get better at teaching. And what was your question? I'm sorry, I just went on a ramble.
It's
What was
just
your question?
what are the common failures that schools
Mm.
do? When they're introducing instructional coaching into their school.
Right, absolutely. Well, one of them is that the coaches aren't coaching, right?
Mm.
They are often the principal or the leadership hasn't introduced the initiative
Mm.
of coaching. in the correct way. What the principal needs to do on the very first day when there's inset, when we start everything off, is say, at this school, we all receive a
Yeah.
coach. We all receive coaching. It is part of the culture of this school is
Yeah.
continuous improvement. If you're a school that doesn't believe in continuous improvement, every teacher can go off and do their own thing, then to task someone with trying to make up a coaching system on their own is going to fail, right?
I do like the idea of, what you're saying there is building a common language, aren't you? And a shared understanding and a vision for what you want teaching and learning to be like. And it has to come from, the leadership. And this is the way we do things here. And what I've noticed about a lot of the conversations I've had on this show is that it all comes down to culture, like school culture and the values and what they want to do with their teaching and learning. And, in order to have a strong culture, it means that you have strong routines where you can do direct instruction, you have better behavior generally, you have improved teaching and learning because there's a clear focus. So that's just kind of what I'm picking up there, that you have to have a shared understanding and build a common language. Just before we go into that question though, Zach, we've got a couple of questions that I just want to bring up on the screen. Well, I'll bring this one up first because it's pretty cool. So a minute, we'll just get rid of this. Okay, so Song says, I'm loving the conversation here in Ghana. So his weekend just got better. But there's a question here as well from Laura Stam. What resource or advice does Zach recommend to get started coaching at a small scale school, for example, a new grade level team?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned two books I would recommend, which is Paul Bambrick Santoyo's Getting Better Faster book. Also Josh Goodrich's Responsive Coaching. These are books that I think
Yeah,
highly recommend you have on your shelf. But what I would investigate is because this helped me a lot as I got into better coaching was uh creating or finding online a system, especially a technology system that will help you to organize your
yeah,
coaching in a way that's very systematic, right? And what I'm describing, it exists out there. There's a couple of different options. What I'm describing is essentially, how am I going to organize my drop-ins with teachers? How am I going to organize my coaching cycles, right? You start a coaching cycle with the teacher, and what often happens, you have an initial conversation. 2 weeks later, you got busy with something else, and now you're trying to have a conversation again. The teaching has changed, the unit has moved on, the students are all on something else. So what I would highly recommend is, in afterwards we can chat too, because I know Laura
yeah,
from Twitter. You can chat about, there are solutions that people are coming out with that can kind of script or help
mm,
mold the conversation that coaches have with teachers. Coaches need a scaffold just like teachers need a scaffold for their own teaching, whether that's a PowerPoint or a workbook or a textbook. We need something that can help guide our thinking with our questioning. So I'm being a little vague here, but there are solutions that exist, technology solutions and platforms that can help coaches.
absolutely. And I'm sure Zach will be in touch via DM because we can be more specific about that on X and show examples of that. I'm sure Zach's got many examples. But if from my point of view, I corroborate what he's saying about Josh Goodrich's book there. Responsive coaching. A lot of it kind of comes down to those strategies that Josh talks about in that book. So I would recommend that. I guess the final question in today's show, though, for Zach is advice for teachers and how teachers can best stay informed about the latest research, whilst also learning how to apply it in their classroom. What do you do to stay informed and be, kind of like on the ball as much as you are in terms of educational research and what works?
Yeah, well, a lot of teachers tell me, like, I want to get into research, I don't know where to start. Social media, what is a great kind of starting point, because people are
Yeah.
sharing research. The science of math, for example, Facebook group. I moderate that group. If you come and join that Facebook group, there's a lot of research that gets shared there, and of course X, people are sharing stuff. But how do you actually get to it, right?
Mm,
It's behind a paywall often. There are ways. One of those is researchgate.net, which is a free platform that you can sign up for. It's sort of like the Facebook for researchers, where they share their research. And if they don't share the PDF on there for free, you can request it directly on there. You can also just find their email, so you can email them. And one of the weirdest things about research, the world of research, is that researchers are totally tickled if you email them and ask them to give you PDFs, right? It's
That's
one
true.
of the weirder it's one of the weirder things people know about. But also, I mean, I like to organize myself with a platform, another free tool called Zotero. Another one's called Mendeley, where I keep all of my research in one sort of filing system, and I do it by topic. If I'm learning about generative learning, I start putting my PDFs in there. And my Zotero, my online organization for research, is like an externalized schema, right? I can see all of the different topics I'm interested in it visually, and I can click on them, and I can start to see the connections between them. There is a world of teachers right now who are obsessed with cognitive science, obsessed with great teaching, and you just have to connect with us. and of course, just plugging my own thing, if for schools to have someone like me come on over and talk about this stuff, often that's the first step. I can give you those resources. I can get your principals excited about research, and then it sort of kind of can move and take off on its own.
What advice would you give to teachers who want to know more about direct instruction?
Right. The John Catt book you first mentioned, the Direct Instruction Practitioner's Handbook by Kurt Engelmann. Kurt Engelmann is one of the twin sons of Zig Engelmann. And that book is the latest thing that will explain in very concrete terms what capital DI is. But also go find yourself a couple of articles. The Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction, free PDF online, explains explicit teaching in a nutshell. Another book is Explicit Instruction by Anita Archer and Hughes, and that book is awesome. And there's people blogging about this, talking, I'm just off the top of my head, right? Of course, Jamie's creating great infographics on this. But Adam Boxer has some great blogs on this.
Don't forget.
Oh, of course, get yourself some one pagers. If you want this broken down into very concrete terms, Jamie's book, One Pagers, it's on my shelf. It's excellent.
Oh, thanks, all right. Well, that's all we've got time for today, folks. But I just want to, sincerely thank Zach for coming on today. It's an early start for him. He's been super insightful. We've got through a hell of a lot in the space of 1 hour in terms of direct instruction, Zach's strategies, for direct instruction, but also like the explicit teaching and discovery learning balance as well, if you want to call it a balance, but Zach's perspectives on it, and instructional coaching, which has been fascinating. So yeah, I want to thank you again, Zach. I hope you have a great day over there as the day starts in the US and it ends in Australia. So thanks for coming on and keep in touch on X.
Thank you so much, JB. This was great.
Okay, everybody. Again, just to remind you, the show is back in 2 weeks' time. I believe we'll be talking about oracy. I hope. If the guest is available, I'm sure that you'll enjoy it and get a lot out of it on the 7th of September. So with that in mind, I just want to thank you for tuning in. Again, I want to thank Zach for being an awesome guest. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.